the different stuff. Like sometimes I'll make a TV reference on the air, and Joey goes, "What the hell are you talking about?" Like Hong Kong Phooey debuted a couple days ago, 50 years ago, right? People are like, "Who the hell?"
No idea.
No, look it up. It's spectacular.
Nothing.
All right. So anyway, it's just this realization that when he just started following as a young kid, Patrick Kane and Jonathan Taves and stuff are already there, and they're going. And then so for them to be in the best spot, they're like, "God, this is really weird." But it's just interesting when people become fans. Like we'll have 6 or 7 year olds or 5-year-olds that were born say in 2012, right, or 2010. Okay, and the first real thing they really remember of their team is that. Kind of like I was born in 71, so I was 11 when the Cardinals won in 82. Right?
Yeah.
It's a fascinating angle of sports, what you remember versus what you need to be told. But here's where I was going with this. Watching the Cardinals do the Hall of Fame stuff, even in a difficult year that they're having, right? And some of the off-ice ticket stuff, people not showing up, all these different things that they're going on. The tie into the history is still so important. So it's just coming down the stairs with Bernie Federko, and you see the impact that Bernie still has in the community, and all the alumni that were at the St. Louis Hall of Fame ceremonies there to help celebrate Kelly Chase. That tie to the history is so important. Because you can, there's people right now, there's young Cardinal fans who would have no idea who Dave Duncan even is.
Right. Or Matt Morris.
I don't know at all about
Matt Morris.
I mean, I know about his career, but I have no recollection of him. Now, I remember Dave just barely a little bit there. I kind of remember the 11 World Series run, but outside of that, I don't remember much of his time.
You have to have those conversations with younger fans so they understand. And then that appreciation of the history, as part of what we're going to do today at the media luncheon, is celebrate 30 years of this building.
Yeah.
This is the 30th anniversary for that. That history is important to kind of keep going, keep at the forefront.
Now, let me ask you this, because you brought up the excitement and the age gap from somebody who was a Blackhawks fan that didn't understand the excitement. Does it feel like to you that there's more excitement for this upcoming season than maybe the past couple of years? Because we've had this conversation because the Cardinals have struggled so much, and the moves that Doug Armstrong made this offseason, it feels like people jump-started the hockey season faster.
I actually think the reason you're feeling that, or what you are feeling there, has more to do with the fact that over the last 18 months, and let's say we go back to the trade deadline where O'Reilly and Tarasenko and that trade deadline happened, that from that moment to this moment, while not everything is going to be perfect, nobody anticipated the firing of Craig Berube. But from that moment to this moment, the Blues have been very upfront about where they're going, and they haven't wavered from it. And then every move that they have made, including the interim head coach, Drew Bannister, including making him your full-time head coach, fits within that plan. And so I think the hype that you're seeing, the feeling that you're seeing is that plan continuing to come into place, where they didn't take a couple steps backwards and say, we're not going to do anything, and we're just going to bring a Dvorsky in, and we're going to let young guys struggle, and we're going to see if Tyler Tucker can do it, and this, and go through all that stuff. They actually then went out and they filled with some veteran players. Let's face it. I don't know that the trade for Joseph and then the signing of his brother is all that great of a move-the-needle transaction. It really shouldn't.
I don't know that the trade for Reddick Foxa, is going to register on the Richter scale. But
if you look at everything in the whole, you're going, okay, well, wait a minute. Here's a big centerman. No, he's not fast in Reddick Foxa, but we know exactly what he is in Detroit. They now have a centerman on that line, especially with Sundqvist not being ready to go at the start of the year, but close. That you know exactly what you're going to get. And ask any coach, they want predictability.
Right.
They want to know when they put it. So if you're going to ask a coach to play younger players, you also got to give that coach some predictability. Well, they brought in some veteran guys. Everything they've done fits this plan. And I do believe that Doug Armstrong's bluntness, some of his amazing quotes. I really wish I had written a lot of those down over the course of the years. I'd have a great book already. I texted him that, like when he talked about, on the offer sheet to his mother. Yeah. I had done it to my mother.
Between that one or jam the knife into the brain and kill the opponent. Those might be the two quotes of Doug.
Yeah, but there's still some great moments in there that I just think that there's confidence, and now there's enough new players coming in that there's intrigue. And I don't listen. You guys will ask the question 60 million times from now until the end of the year. You'll ask it of yourselves. You'll ask it of guests. What do you think is going to happen? All this thing with the play. The reality of it is, we don't know. But we do know we're in a much better spot than even when we were at the end of last year. And I think that's what we're feeling. More than the apathy towards the Cardinals or City or anything like that.
And that's kind of where I was going to kind of ask you this question, Kirk, because we've got this to talk about potentially later on in the show today. But the Athletic had a piece out today of kind of teams stuck in the muddy middle. And the Blues were in that list. And maybe it's this what we're talking about here of like the honesty from the Blues.
Where they're at, the kind of upfrontness with it, and kind of the prospects that they have. But for me, I don't feel like they're a team stuck in the muddy middle. And the reason I would say that is because it feels like there's a direction. When I think of muddy middle, I think of the Cardinals, where it is, okay, there's not a clear direction that's been conveyed from the organization. You see a bunch of older players, which the Blues do have, but you also see in the Cardinal situation a farm system that's kind of drying out, older guys that are on bigger contracts that aren't performing up to expectation. I don't feel that way with the Blues necessarily.
I think you put it perfectly. If you were going to define the muddy middle, the mucky middle, that I define it the same way you did.
Yeah.
BK and Brooke asked me the same question this morning when it came to that list. Do I believe the Blues are in the middle right now? Absolutely. Do they belong on a list of teams that are in the middle and maybe, let's say, the unknown middle of what the season is really going to present? A hard team to predict what your expectations should be? Absolutely. Are they stuck in the mucky middle? I don't believe they are because so far their plan has – they were better last year than they were the year before.
Yeah. And
you were within the final 4 games of the regular season still battling for a playoff spot. You had 93 points. Mm-hmm. Okay. You're within 4 or 5 points of really being there. So I don't think you're stuck. It's funny that list that came out, the Ottawa Senators. I think it's fair to put the Ottawa Senators in there. There should be a lot of hope, but they can't seem to get past a hump. Nobody anticipated what the Winnipeg Jets did last season. So I don't know that they're in the mucky middle when you've got the goaltender that they have. But again, the question is, but what's the support? Where's the rest coming? How does Cole Perfetti? How do these other ones work out? So there are teams that are definitely in the middle, but I agree with you completely. You're not stuck in the middle if you happen to be in the middle while you're implementing a plan. 12 players the Blues have either drafted or acquired right now in the organization that could impact this roster within the next year to 2 to 3 years, counting this year, that are 25 or younger were drafted in the first round. Do you expect every one of them to make it? Nope. That would be pretty spectacular.
It'd be good if they did.
But you're hoping that the work that Tony Feltrin and his staff did for the draft, you're hoping that the work that Tim Taylor does, and you're hoping that the work that the entire hockey operations side does in their evaluating. And let's face it, this is where the Blues have been different than the Cardinals. The Cardinals' player evaluation has been horrifically flawed over a number of years now, and that, guys, is that is the only reason the Cardinals are where they are. And the Blues, though, they've actually, the Jake Neighbors, they've had those 20th overall picks and stuff start to come through. And so, again, back to the first question, I also believe there's faith in that because fans have seen some of that. Fans are doubting what they're seeing down the street because they've seen good players go to other teams and perform, and it creates that doubt.
And to that point, Kurt, I mentioned the Cardinals being stuck, and, I mentioned the veterans in their contracts kind of having some of those guys kind of age out, and they're still on some long-term deals. Michaelis, Arenado potentially. The other thing, too, is to your point on their development is that drafting and developing those guys and making sure they don't stall out. And that's why I've said with, Drew Bannister this year number 1 full year, don't get me wrong, the hope is the playoffs. The hope is to improve upon that point total that you said. But for me, year one for Drew Bannister is that development. Because how do you get potentially stuck if you're the Blues? I'm not sure necessarily it's the contracts for this team because they don't have a ton of older guys that are on long-term deals. Don't get me wrong, Shen still got a little bit on his deal, but Saad's coming off the book soon. Some of the defensemen are coming off here soon. Where they could get stalled is if they don't develop those guys, if guys stall at the NHL level. And that's why, for me, that's where when I look at Drew Bannister and evaluating year one, it's not so much about wins and losses, it's about development of some of those NHL guys.
So this is a unique aspect that Drew Bannister is in. I haven't had a chance to talk to him about this. Hopefully when I see him today maybe. But if you look at Drew Bannister's career as a coach, he has won everywhere he's been. Has a at the junior level coached. He's coaching young guys. He's coaching players that are developing. He's developing players. There's a lot of players already with the Blues that over his 5 years coaching the Blues minor league system went through him, became players because of him, much like we had Barbashev become players because of Berube, whereas the coach before Berube wasn't doing anything with them, right? This is the first year, the first time for Drew Bannister from the start of a training camp is coaching players that are there, is coaching stars, okay, is coaching players that have already developed. Now you're coaching parts of the game. You're coaching motivation. You're coaching a 30-year-old guy, and that's different. I'm excited as all heck to see how he does it because this is, if you think about it, this is maybe his first chance to really, truly implement what he believes the game of hockey is.
Yeah.
Because he's got a full set of players, for the most part, the veteran guys, right, Tanner, that can do it.
Yeah.
You got to teach some of it. But if you tell a Braden Shen, a Justin Falk, a Colton Parayko, and some of these guys, Brandon Saad, what you're looking for, well, they know how to do it. So that's a totally unique aspect to Drew Bannister being a coach this year that I haven't seen, frankly, very often and talked to many guys about. So it's a storyline I'm looking for.
It's part of the excitement, and then on Friday and Sunday it's part of the excitement because it's the prospect showcase that's taking place up at Centene. I know you and Joey V are going to be broadcasting it here on 101.
Yeah.
So
How
going to
cool
be
is that? We're back on the air, huh?
Yeah. Well, when Brett, who works on the PR, walked in his suit, and he's like, yeah, it's the start of the season. It felt like the start of the season. You're in your suit. I kept mine in the closet just a couple more weeks longer, Curbs. Just a couple more weeks longer.
Okay, so I've got my guy that I'm just really curious to see what he does. I would fully expect him to start the season in Springfield, but he's somebody that has not been mentioned much. He will be participating in the prospect camp.
I think your guy is the same as my guy.
And this is a guy that because he plays a solid two-way game, because he plays a very conscientious game, a smart, conservative game, but does have some offensive ability, and he showed that at the World Juniors last year. He comes in as a 20-year-old now. He's going to participate in the prospect camp, and that's Alexanteri Kaskamaki. You do not have, because of the players that Doug Armstrong brought in, you no longer have to rush a guy to the NHL. Mm-hmm. And if you listen to the interview that Doug did, a terrific interview with Cam and Strick on the Cam and Strick podcast, he talked about how he felt that maybe he rushed Jake Neighbors. He should have started Jake in the minors rather than here, than put him down. I think the Nashville Predators with David Porrell and Barry Trotz had a long-time philosophy of this as well. Doug's never been about anointing guys. He doesn't want young guys comfortable. He wants young guys feeling that I can't be. There's not one young guy, except for Jake Neighbors, that played on this team last year, that should feel like they have a spot.
Right.
And that includes a Matt Kessel. Now, if Matt Kessel gets outplayed this year, they still have the opportunity to send him down. Mm-hmm. Okay? I mean, so, and I'm not saying, I'm just using him as the example there.
Yeah.
Okay, but you're Zach Dean. You're a 30th overall pick. You're a first-round pick. You're a fourth-line center right now. Knocked on the door last year. You got to come in and earn a spot. They just signed Zimmerman. Well, Kaskamaki and Dean are now going to be battling for playing time. Yep. I'm just curious to see how his development comes out of that, because he's looked good and he's progressed in a way that when you talk to people in the organization, they like him. Does he get a crack?
I'm looking forward to this weekend. Friday, it's against the Blackhawks prospects, and then Sunday afternoon, it's against the Minnesota Wild prospects. Kerbs, I know you got this event to go MC. We appreciate you taking some time and swinging by, and we'll see you soon.
Always good talking, fellas. Cheers. We'll see you at the rink.
Voice of the Blues, Chris Kerber. We'll take a break. We'll come back with more here from the Blues Media Day Luncheon on BK and Ferrario on 101 ESPN.
from the Car Shield Studio on 101 ESPN.
We're back here on BK and Ferrario live at Enterprise Center for our Media Day luncheon. We are here as it's kind of the kickoff to the upcoming season for the St. Louis Blues, and we are honored now to be joined by Blues chairman Tom Stillman before he goes up on the big stage for Media Day here. And Tom, this feels like the official kickoff to hockey season. Does it feel the same way for you?
Yeah, it's sort of the start of several events that lead up to having players actually on the ice on September 19th.
Yeah.
So it start to set the table, and if you go out to Centene, there are a lot of guys skating every day, and they're working out. So, it's building now.
Tom, we just got done talking with Kerbs a little bit ago, and talking with him, and he's out and around talking.
Of the moves we made over the summer. As you know, we're a little muted early, and then the big bang at the end. So I think, every season real fans are excited because there's always potential. But with the moves we made, and especially the last moves, I think that charges things up a little more.
I got to know, because you mentioned that big bang, and I think that's what everybody was talking about this offseason, were those offer sheets. And I know Doug Armstrong has a phenomenal relationship with you, talking with you every step of the way. What were those conversations like when he came to you and said, we have this opportunity in front of us?
It was a meeting with a few of us, and he introduced the idea, and I'm sure he could immediately see the smile on my face, and it went from there. And there was just Doug and Ryan Miller and Alex Dean, Tim Taylor. They all did it. Just tremendous amount of analysis. That's not something you enter into lightly. And they did their homework and then some. So it was just some great work by that team.
So we're talking with Blues chairman Tom Stillman here at our Blues Media Day luncheon on BK and Ferrario. Tom, I remember back before the end of the regular season, you were with us up in the broadcast booth, and we talked during one of the intermissions, and I had asked you about the plan for the offseason, and you spoke about how, if we spend the cap, it has to be under the right circumstances. What makes sense for the team? The same age group, the same bracket that we want this roster with. Is that what kind of leaned you into the decision of being aggressive still this offseason, of looking at the moves that were made and falling in line with what you discussed?
Yeah, it's just when you're aiming at that younger age group, it's tough. I mean, those are assets that don't become available very much, especially the first round draft choice variety. So when an opportunity like that comes up, you have to consider it. And like Doug says, we're only doing that to improve ourselves. We're not trying to hurt another team. We wouldn't use the offer sheet, in a way that was just trying to hurt another team by driving up their cost. We're not going to do that. But this is what the CBA allows, and it was, the rules were followed to a T, and it's part of the game.
And Tom, with this big bang that we're talking about, that you guys made this offseason, and the aggression that we saw from Doug Armstrong, does it make you think that maybe you guys can accelerate this retool a little bit faster, or is it still just kind of trying to stay kind of what the current trajectory is for it right now?
It's hard to say. I mean, I don't want to put these former Edmonton players in the position where they're going to come in and be the saviors. They're not. They're good players. But again, they're 22 and 23, so they're continuing to develop. But it certainly gives us another step, another, two key pieces to the development. They'll make us better this year, but more importantly, they'll make us better next year and the year after that, as they develop further.
What's the impact of that, Tom? Because it's now 12 former first-round draft picks that are 23 or younger, including a guy like Jake Neighbors, who nearly scored 30 goals last season.
Yeah, I think, within some time frame, we have the most first-round draft choices in the league right now, which is, if you think back, just a few years, that's a huge change.
Yeah.
Because, when you're winning and contending, you're spending draft choices. So it's quite a catch up, and it's going to make us better. It's going to make camp very competitive. Everybody, is going to be looking all around them. So. And, that obviously just makes for a better camp and ultimately a better team.
A couple more questions for Tom Stillman before we let him go with the Media Day luncheon here. For a lot of media members, get a chance to be at Enterprise Center, walk through the locker room, get to shake hands with everybody. But, Tom, we've talked so much about your relationship with Doug Armstrong. And Doug had an outstanding quote in the Post-Dispatch with Ben Frederickson a couple of weeks ago, just discussing how, he works for the St. Louis Blues. He works for the fans. And he said his main role is making sure that we're always being aggressive, always making sure that we're staying competitive. And you mentioned 5 years ago we were talking about a Stanley Cup championship with the potential to run it back with another one. And then 5 years later, we're talking about all of these draft picks. What's the impact of a guy like Doug Armstrong on this organization?
That's a big question and a long answer. But I will tell you that his mind never stops thinking. There's what seems to be in a lot of cases a throwaway line. Well, we're always looking to improve the team.
For sure.
That is very true with him. It's just, the mind is always on, whether it's, something, grand like this, what we're calling the Big Bang, or just little things here and there. He never stops thinking about it, never stops, taking some initiative or moving something or doing something. So, and that leadership in a hockey operations department sets the tone. That's where everybody, there's no being satisfied with where we are. There's no standing still and just kind of seeing how things go. It's always pushing to see how we can get better.
Well, Tom, you mentioned benchmarks throughout the offseason. Next benchmark is the prospect tournament on Friday that they're going to be hosting at Centene Community Ice Center with Minnesota and Chicago, and I know a lot of fans got to be excited about that one. You as well, getting a whole group of hockey fans coming to the Centene.
Yeah, and it's fun to have. I mean, the Traverse City tournament was great for years.
Yeah.
But, in some ways it's not the most efficient and it doesn't allow your fans to see your prospects in those games. So this gives us, every third year we'll have it here. You get to see our guys and two other teams. It's not as many games. There was some feeling that playing whatever they did up there, 5 games.
Yeah, it was a while.
and then asking those kids to come into camp
for sure
the next day. I mean, that's kind of so. I think this is much more functional, and it's good for our fans. They can see our young guys.
And you pick the right teams to do it with too, right? Minnesota and Chicago, just cycling that every 3 years.
Yeah,
just
great.
Embrace the rivalry a little bit more.
Exactly. Build it early.
That's right. Tom, well, it's always great to see you, sir. We're looking forward to this upcoming season, and enjoy the rest of Media Day, and I'm sure we'll see you at Centene on Friday.
Yep. Thank you.
There you go. It's Blues Chairman Tom Stillman. We appreciate him being with us. We'll hit questions and answers next here on 101 ESPN. 314-399-9646 is our Air Comfort Service text line. You can send us a text. You can also check us out up on our YouTube channel at 101 ESPN STL, the Graveyard Chat up and running. We are here at Enterprise Center. As you can tell on YouTube, if you're looking at it, the Blues locker room is right behind us. The ice is right in front of us, although there is no ice right now. That's where the Media Day luncheon is going to be taking place. We just talked with Tom Stillman a little bit ago. So if you've got any questions, you can send them over to us on our Air Comfort Service text line or over up on our YouTube chat at the 101 ESPN STL. T-Bone, let's start with this from the 618. Fellas, in terms of NFL Week 1, who was the team that was most surprising to you?
Oh, that's a good question. I think the most surprising team for me, there's a couple that kind of stuck out to me, some in the negative frame of that. But going off of a team that surprised me that played really well, I'm going to go to the Friday game and the Philadelphia Eagles. They have a ton of talent on that roster.
Yeah.
And we've talked about it, but they just give off weird vibes with what's been going on. The story came out, I think it was in the middle of training camp, of like, hey, Nick Sirianni and his flower growing doesn't really get along with Jalen Hurts. And I was just like, okay, there's weird vibes. I'm shocked he survived the offseason as the head coach. There's going to be immense pressure on him because there was a report yesterday Bill Belichick wants to get back to coaching.
Of course he
year.
does. Week 1, I want to get back.
I think they were the team that shocked me because they played really well. Their offense looked great. Defensively, I think you saw that they need a little bit of work, but I was really impressed with the way that they played, and especially for a game in which they had to play in Brazil.
Mine was the Minnesota Vikings. And you can understand why. I doubt Sam Darnold. I don't think he's very good. Now, I understand you went up against the Giants, but the Giants' defense is supposed to be decent, and Sam Darnold just picked them apart. For the first, half, he missed one completion. He's got his weapons. I didn't think he was going to make Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison look that good because the quarterback sucks. He stayed upright, he stayed protected, and he was able to get those passes off. If Dable didn't look that impressed either on the sideline.
Brian Dable knows he's going to have to update his resume. I feel bad for that guy.
That poor guy. From the 314, and again, our Air Comfort Service text line, 314-399-9646 is where you can send your questions and answers over to us. From the 314, guys, who is an off-radar Blues prospect to keep an eye on? I can give you a couple of them. The one that Kerbs mentioned, Alex Santeri-Kaskamaki.
Was that, by the way, who you were thinking of?
It was exactly who I was thinking of.
I was thinking he was going to say Tanner Dickinson because I feel like that's a name that he's talked about as well.
He's a good one. Dylan Peterson was the kid that we talked to during the prospect camp from Boston, the one who we played with Macklin Celebrini. Dude is big. He's going to be one. But Kaskamaki, if people remember correctly, Grant Francis was the one that brought him up at training camp last year. I think this Kaskamaki is the prototypical fourth-line centerman that the St. Louis Blues always love to covet. Now, he's not big, but he's fast and he's feisty. To me, think Vladimir Sobotka. Like, that's who this kid reminded me of. I think he played over in Finland all of last year. He's going to be a guy that could potentially play in the minor leagues this upcoming season, but that's a dude to keep an eye on. Vadim Zarenko, I always think is important to keep an eye on because he's a goaltender, and the Blues seem to always be deep with goaltending. That's going to be one of those. And then defensively, if you want to pull one guy up out of that group, you can look at either Buchinger or Gaudette. Those are two guys that were former first-round picks that the Blues have seemingly been high on at least. But, yeah, I would say keep an eye on Kaskamaki in that prospect tournament, which Zach Bolduc is playing in that, by the way. So Bolduc and Dean and Dvorsky are three guys that you've seen already that are going to be playing in this prospect tournament.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see what Dean and Bolduc and Dvorsky look like because it almost is kind of their head start for training camp.
Especially if you're Dean and Bolduc.
Yeah, I'll be fascinated to see how they play because, and I don't know if you feel this way or not, but for me, it's one of those where it's like a typical college football game that we talk about, like Mizzou versus Buffalo, Mizzou versus Murray State. It's better to come out of that not thinking a whole lot. It's a lot worse if we have to say, oh, they didn't play well there. Because if they didn't play well at prospect camp, how is that going to translate when they get to training camp? Just my view on it. But I watched Dvorsky when they had their prospect camp. Whew, that guy looks like he's going to be a stud.
Yep, absolutely. And then final one from the 618, fellas. After watching Mizzou post another shutout, are you convinced they're winning 11 games this season? A little bit later with college football. The team that I'm not convinced is great, like people are making them out to be, is Alabama. And Grant said this last week. Yeah. I think Mizzou gives Alabama a run for their money. And then we're talking about teams like UMass, Texas A&M, Auburn, Vanderbilt. Boston College, I do believe, is going to be a tough matchup. Like, Yeah, I realistically could see this team coming out with 11 victories by the end of it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely in the realm of possibility. I think they're actually going to wipe the floor with Boston College. I don't think they're that good of a football team. I think they're being a little overhyped because they beat Florida State, who, trust me, watching Florida State
also was not a good football team.
Yeah, they stink, and then Boston College had a cupcake game the next week. So I understand how they got to the top 25. I think their two toughest challenges are going to be Texas A&M and Alabama, but I'm with you. Alabama's not impressive again over the weekend. And honestly, Oklahoma, the other tough matchup on their schedule.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
Oklahoma really struggled with, I think it was Temple, if I remember correctly. Temple. I didn't even know they were an FBS program.
Right, so we're all in
and
agreement.
They almost beat Oklahoma.
Undefeated.
So, yeah, no. I think they probably, I would say like 10 wins has to be, of course, the bare minimum.
Yep.
I can definitely see how you convince yourself of 11. 12 is just where I'm not going to get to, though. I think it's going to be too tough to go 12-0 and have a perfect season.
12 means you're going to have to beat both Alabama and Oklahoma, the two that will probably give you the toughest matchups.
We really don't want to play in that conference championship game.
Yeah, we did say that.
A
B-Kid did kind of loop me on that one and make me look stupid, which is always fun to have with BK on the radio.
That's Brandon for
Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. We'll take a break. When we come back, we need to get into the NFL. We kind of had one with questions and answers. Which team that underperformed over the weekend are you most worried about? And there's a lot of them. We'll discuss that next coming up here on 101 ESPN. We're going to call an Omaha audible here, T-Bone.
Oh.
Omaha. Like channeling my Peyton Manning, by the way.
Here we go.
Here we go. So we're going to push the NFL back a little bit because we are going to have
I hate that league, let me tell you.
We are going to push back the NFL talk because the Hall of Famer Bernie Federko is going to swing by here momentarily. He's up on stage right now. They're giving their presentation for the Media Day luncheon for the media members that are here. Kind of the unofficial kickoff to hockey season as the preseason kicks off. 12 days from now on the 21st, and then you've got the prospects tournament that's taking place on Friday, like we talked about with Tom Stillman. But, T-Bone, before we talk with Bernie, I did want to bring up that Athletic article that we mentioned with Kerbs. The mushy middle is what they're calling it. Harmon Dale, who covers the Vancouver Canucks, is the one that put this one together. And he went through the list of teams. There were 8 teams that are in this mushy middle with no sign of getting out of it. And that's the part that you mentioned to Kerbs, I think is an important criteria when you're discussing this topic. Some of these make sense. Like the New York Islanders, I think the New York Islanders hit that level that they were supposed to. They don't have the deepest pool of prospects. They've got a great goaltender, good defense, but you've always kind of been in the middle in that Eastern Conference. Seattle, Ottawa, Washington, the LA Kings, Detroit Red Wings. I think Detroit's probably the poster child of being stuck in this mushy middle where it doesn't seem like there's an end in sight. Putting the Blues in this is a bold take, in my opinion, because it's not that they're in it. They are, and there's no denying where the Blues are at right now. They've just missed the playoffs the last couple of years. They drafted top 10, then they've drafted 15th overall. But the Blues are also in a position to where this retool on the fly that Harmon Dale mentioned, that retool on the fly has been more successful than what these other teams have tried to accomplish. Because what Washington has tried to do, for example, is tried to stay relevant with their superstar Alex Ovechkin. What the Islanders have tried to do is be aggressive and stay aggressive, but it's dipped off quickly. What the Blues are doing is they took their step back and said, we can still at least compete, but let's develop the system so that when we're actually ready to compete, we've got a deeper system than what most of these teams have. That's the special recipe if you want to get out of that mushy middle fast, is making sure that you have guys that impact an NHL roster quicker than the other teams that are trying to just recycle the same roster over and over.
Yeah, and I think the thing for me that makes it feel like they're not in that murky middle is, to me, they don't have a just truly bad contract on the book that they can't get out of. Right. Like Krug and Falk are kind of in that spot, at $6.5 million for the next 3 years. But that's 3 years. It's not like they're in the midst of a 6-year deal that they regret. Look at Calgary and the Kadri deal. I think they regret that contract. Or who's the other one on their books? I'm drawing a blank on Huberdeau.
Yeah.
That's a bad contract.
Right.
And now they are stuck with that contract, and they don't really have a sense of direction. They belong kind of in this murky middle, in my opinion. I think when you're talking about the Blues, you can see the direction that they're going with.
Right.
You see all those young first-round picks that you had mentioned to Tom Stillman when we had the chance to catch up with him. You've got this core that's locked up in Kyrou, Thomas, who are 26 and 25 years old. Booch, 29 years old, is locked up. You got Dvorsky on the way. There's a direction for the Blues. When I think of that muddy middle or murky middle, and maybe it's just because I don't follow the New York Islanders. I don't follow some of these teams that were in this article as closely as I do the Blues. I don't know if there's a direction. It feels stuck. It does feel kind of like what you were saying, kind of recycling kind of veterans in and out, trying to just figure out, squeeze the lemon just a little bit more, see if you can get any more juice out of it. And the Blues kind of avoided that. I think where you could have seen the Blues potentially get stuck was if they brought back an O'Reilly.
Right.
Instead of trading him, they signed him to an extension, and maybe he ends up looking like the guy we saw in the final year with the Blues, which didn't really work out. That's how you probably end up getting stuck. But the Blues said, you know what? We have to do this. We did everything we could with this roster. Now it's time to kind of make that pivot. They did that 2 years ago, and now they have a direction. And that's why, though they will be in the middle, I don't doubt that at all for this season, I feel like they're not in that murky middle because there's a sense of direction. And maybe that is just because the Blues have been upfront and honest, and it makes it feel a little bit better, and maybe that's why I'm more optimistic than some people on the national level.
Yeah.
But to me, they are not in that murky middle. They have a direction. They are in the middle, but they're not in a bad spot in the middle.
So me, when I read an article about the Blues on The Athletic, that's not Jeremy Rutherford. I should put that criteria out there. But when I read an article about the Blues, I find myself getting angry every once in a while, which happens, Steve-O. We all get that way, right? Yeah. You have one anger trigger point, I have another. When you read deeper in this article and they talk about teams that are on the outside or just missed this list of being in the mushy middle, and they listed the Minnesota Wild, not on the negative of like, oh, they're too bad to be in the mushy middle. They said that Minnesota's on the other side of it because they've got cap relief coming. They've got a good prospect pool that's available to them. And that's the part that I looked at and I said, man, I understand because Minnesota does have a couple of pieces that they drafted highly. But looking at a Minnesota Wild prospect pool and looking at a St. Louis Blues prospect pool, I think we're putting too low of expectations on this prospect pool. And the reason I say that is because a website that I follow, Elite Prospects, they dive deep into these NHL prospects, and these are like former scouts that are doing this. And they were talking about Dalibor Dvorsky. And I think that's a lot of the reason why people look at the Blues and say, well, their prospect pool may not be as strong as we thought it was. Because Dalibor Dvorsky is maybe a middle six forward rather than the potential of a top six forward. But if you go through this article on Elite Prospects, I didn't realize that Dalibor Dvorsky last year in the OHL, he was voted as the second smartest player in the OHL by the coaches. And I went back through and just tried to find, okay, who were guys in the top 3 of that list in years past? Over the last 6 years, these were prospects in the OHL that were listed as a top 3 smartest player by OHL coaches. Wyatt Johnston, Luke Evangelista, Cole Pervetti, Nick Suzuki, Evan Bouchard, Robert Thomas, Jason Robertson. When I look at Minnesota's article and they say, well, they're not in the mushy middle because they're on the other side of that ready to compete because of their prospect pool. I look at that list there of players that were in the same conversation as Dalibor Dvorsky, and if you put Dalibor Dvorsky in the same conversation as Wyatt Johnston, Robert Thomas, Jason Robertson, that's gold for the St. Louis Blues. That pushes you out of that mushy middle.
And here would be my question, because when you sent this to us, this was my initial reaction is, should that be the expectation from Dvorsky? Does he have to become that guy for both, A, the Blues to avoid the murky middle, as to what you were just making the point of there, and B, for him to be a success as to where he was drafted? You know, sometimes I think that gets a little, like Zach Dean for me, for example.
Right.
You know, if Zach Dean ends up becoming a regular fourth-line center for the Blues, to me that's a win. Got him in a trade, got him in the Ivan Barbashev deal. To me, that would be a win. But some guys, you know, fans will look at it and say, oh, well, if Dvorsky just becomes a third-line center for the Blues in their bottom 6, then no, that won't be a win. So that's what my question would be is, does he have to become those guys for Dvorsky to be a hit for the St. Louis Blues?
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the question that most people will be asking. And I think if you're talking about one prospect that has a lot of pressure on him going into training camp, I think from a fan's perspective, it's expecting to see more from Dalibor Dvorsky. And if it's not there, if he starts in the AHL, I think conversations are, oh, what happened with Dvorsky, which aren't warranted. He's young, but I just found that really interesting when you have that type of voting going on by coaches in the Ontario Hockey League, and Dvorsky's in that same conversation. That puts a little bit more respect and I think onus on his name and how you get out of that mushy middle. Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. Bernie's still up on stage, so what we'll do, we will come back with some NFL storylines to get into next year on 101 ESPN. So as these media day luncheons go, when there's a presentation, you got to be flexible because obviously questions get asked, you mingle. So we will get Bannister momentarily as he's wrapping up over on the stage, and he's going to join us here on BK and Ferrario. Along with Tanner Hendrickson and Graham Francis, we're here at Enterprise Center for our Media Day luncheon, as this one is the start of the hockey season. You get the prospect tournament on Friday and Sunday, and then the Blues have their Media Day, I think, next Wednesday, and then Thursday, Friday, Saturday is when training camp starts, and then their first preseason game is Saturday the 21st.
And we'll be out there for training camp as well, broadcasting live from the Centene Community Ice Center, as we'll be at our EMB Granite studio for all 3 days of training camp and the Media Day as well on Wednesday.
I think the conversation that I was having with a couple of people was they were expecting a really large crowd for this prospect tournament.
To see you?
To see us, of course, but we're kind of like animals at the zoo. You walk by and you tap on the glass and you kind of let us know when you're there. But getting over there and doing the prospect tournament, they said they're expecting a pretty decent crowd for that. When I did that broadcast with Joe, that was
for the
prospect tournament that they were just having, where it was against each other, the scrimmage that they did. I mean, you had a decent sized crowd for that one, T-Bone. But this one isn't just the Blues prospect. You've got Chicago's prospects coming in. You've got Minnesota's prospects coming in. And I think because this team is in a situation where they have a lot of these highly touted prospects, you're expecting a larger group of people. And for those that don't know, this team's already been skating on the ice together, not as a formal team because camp hasn't started, but these guys have been skating with a lot of these younger players every single day. It's what they call the captain skate, essentially, where everyone's out there just kind of getting used to being on the ice together. I do think that's something to take into consideration of the excitement for this season when you get all of these guys on the ice together quickly.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see because, we talk about it with kind of the Cardinals of the veterans and the young guys, trying how the veterans kind of bring in some of those younger guys. Jake Neighbors, year 2, lived with Braden Shen for a while, if I remember correctly. You're going to have a Dvorsky that's going to come in and, not try and be your best friend. He's going to try and take somebody's job.
Right.
You got Zach Bolduc. You've got Zach Dean that are trying to fight to make some roster spots. You got Dylan Holloway who's trying to prove himself with a new team. It should be fun to kind of see what happens and how those guys kind of mesh together. And I'll be curious to see kind of how Drew Bannister tries and gets things going here in training camp, trying to set the tone. It's year number 1 for him as the full-time guy. He's had an offseason where he's talked with the veteran guys. I remember JR's piece where he talked with, I think it was Justin Falk, where he met him for dinner. I can bet he did that with a lot of players this offseason. It'll be interesting to see how he's able to kind of get this team towards what Kerbs was saying of, this is year number 1 of Drew Bannister to say, okay, here's what I want to do for us this year, and see what he's able to do for the St. Louis Blues.
Well, the Western Conference remains competitive, and that's the part that I think so many people are talking about. And when you have the competition level, when you have all of the players, the excitement level with it, that creates a little bit more of that. As we're here at Enterprise Center for the Blues Media Day luncheon, and we are joined now by the Blues head coach, Drew Bannister, who just got off the stage and had to run to another microphone. Thus is the life, right, Drew?
Guys, yeah, that is the life right now, and it's good because I've missed it. I've missed being around St. Louis, and I've missed spending my time with all of our media friends.
Well, it's good to see you, Drew. Welcome back officially. And I was listening to the Cardinals broadcast the other night where you were there for Blues Night, and you were talking with Chip Carey about how this offseason was a little different because you had the opportunity to have your wife and your daughters with you to enjoy the city. So did you get a little bit more of a feel for the city of St. Louis rather than last year, where it was just right into the hockey season?
Yeah, and I think it's a time of year, too, where there's just so much going on around St. Louis right now, comparable to our dreary winter months that we have all over North America. But, being able to enjoy the Science Center, being able to enjoy the zoo, being able to walk around Clayton, getting to a ball game. I've been to 2 ball games now. So all those things that go into, being a part of a community. I'm not just here to coach a team, even though it is my job. I think it's my job to kind of, get myself into the community and do things that a St. Louis Blue or the organizational people do, because you see that with a lot of players that have played here in the past that have ended up staying here. They're a part of the community.
What's this offseason been like for you, Drew? Because now you have that direction where last year it was you were in the American Hockey League.
Yep.
Now it's been you have a full offseason to get ready for training camp with the NHL squad. How different was that for you?
I mean, not typically any different than how I would have went about running my staff and developing our plan with our team going into the year. You have a pretty good idea after July 1 in the American League who you're going to have on your roster, what your team is going to look like. There are some surprises coming out of main camp. You might get somebody down or you might lose somebody. But it really doesn't change the aspect of how you want to play as a team, your values as a team, your standards as a team. And I think that's, as a staff from when we left here after our game in April, our last game in April, we started to find what our deficiencies are, what our messages is going to be to our players. And then one of the most important things with me is just building the relationships with the players that maybe I didn't have enough time to get to know.
And Coach, you this offseason worked with Doug Armstrong and assembling this squad. What was it like to have the offseason to work with him and kind of build this team kind of the way you want to see it with him, and the big bang that happened at the end of the offseason with Holloway and Broberg being brought in?
I think like Doug and myself talked very early on, and it was probably even going back to a lot of my conversations when I was interviewing for the job of what I thought needed to change, what was the vision for my team, how we wanted to play, what were the type of players, not individual players, nothing names like that. That's on the management side, but more the direction that I saw the team that we had. And then, because I had pretty good knowledge of our youth, the players that were coming up, how they would fit in to that identity as a club. So a lot of those conversations were early on in, the spring that led into the summer, and then Doug and his group had to get to work, and they have the tough work to do of once July 1, what are the pieces and how do they fit in, and they've done an outstanding job of getting those pieces to fit into our group.
So Drew, and again, we're talking with Blues head coach Drew Bannister here on BK and Ferrario. Drew, you mentioned working with those youth at different level, and you've worked with veterans in the past, specifically in the American Hockey League, but going through the development stage when you were in the OHL working with younger players, the AHL working with players, what's the biggest difference that you've noticed in terms of that group versus working with established veterans?
I don't think it really changes much, because at every level, a player has a vision for themselves, and you want to help them develop the skills to get to where they think they are. So if they're junior players and they want to play in the NHL, well, there's going to be a path. Not everybody goes right from junior or college straight to the NHL. There's very few players that are going to do that. But you have to develop them to become a pro. And then, at the American Hockey League, you get these kids that come from junior and college, and, their sights are set on being an NHL player. Well, we have to work on the habits and to the day-to-day things that NHL players do, so that when you get your opportunity, you're ready. And I think it's important to streamline that between the two organizations. And again, I go back to, what my standards are as a coach and what my expectations are for our players when they walk into the room on a practice day, what we expect them to do in the gym, what the expectations are and our standards are on the ice, and then what the expectations are when they come off the ice, and getting themselves prepared for the next day. And even the away from the rink stuff that no one sees, making sure you're getting proper rest, making sure you're eating properly. A lot of things in the American League that go unnoticed, especially with our first-year players. It's like, a lot of them have lived away from homes, but they've never had to rent an apartment. They've never had to pay a bill. They've never written a check. So those are things that we don't think of a lot as coaches, that go into some of the stress that the players have away from the rink that they bring to the rink. So those are things that an American Hockey League coach that you can ask your veterans to kind of help out a little bit, but you have to have an understanding of the stress too, because this just what you're asking from the players at the rink it's a big jump from what they were asked at junior, and when they were all the best players. And now they're not the best players anymore, And then you put on top of that all the stuff of becoming an adult, and becoming a man, having to wash your clothes for the first time, having to do dishes, having to make your own meals. How does that come into effect with their play? Well, it does. and we have to walk them through that.
And that's where the impact of the relationship you're trying to build with them in the offseason comes from, correct? To where you have that ability to come to you with problems rather than essentially stuffing it down and working through it.
Yeah, and I think those are conversations, because when we're at the rink, it's hockey, hockey. But there has to be a relationship beyond hockey with these players, because when the tough conversations have to come, or they do come, they're a little bit easier to have when it's not just a hockey player-coach relationship. So that was my number one thing. My number two thing in the summer was becoming a better carpenter.
Oh yeah, how did that go?
Pretty good. I wasn't the boss, so whenever something went wrong, I wasn't the one to blame. So my brother-in-law and I, at our cottage on the Manitoulin Island, we're running out of room. So we built a garage, and it's not quite finished yet, but we framed it, just the two of us, with a little bit of help from neighbors. But so he was the foreman and I was the worker.
Oh man, when I see you again, I got it. So I tried to be a carpenter myself. Yeah. My wife wanted a picnic table for our backyard, and I'm like, oh cool, I can do this, no problem. Drew, no joke. This picnic table is put together, but I think it's all curving in. I said, you'll get about a good year out of this picnic table, and then beyond that, I don't know what happens.
Yeah, we had some issues with getting things plumb and square, and that was. I was cursing at him a few times. I'm like, really, like.
Well, that's how you become an actual carpenter. That's how you really become a carpenter. So, Drew, a couple more questions, and then we'll let you get out of here. But we appreciate you swinging by. What's the excitement level from a coach, though, when you see all of these new names that are acquired by Doug Armstrong in the offseason, whether it's trading for Matthew Joseph and Radek Faksa or making the offer sheets for young players like Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg?
I think there's a lot of excitement from everybody. I think our players are excited. No question, I'm excited. Mm-hmm. The fans are excited.
You can tell that, can't you, walking around?
We just want to get to work.
Yeah.
We're ready. I'm ready. I'm done with this summer thing. I'm ready to get on the ice, and the players are, and you can see it. Our guys are here. The team's here. And we're going to have 62, 63 guys at camp. I bet you there's 60 guys here, and they have been here for a good week to 10 days. If training camp starts tomorrow, guys are ready to go.
Yeah.
That's how excited our group is. And it's just filtering, and we're ready to start becoming a team, and that's what, from day one of training camp to when we start in October is, building those habits, that foundation of getting unified and becoming a team.
Yeah.
Coach, you guys, speaking of the on-ice stuff, you guys are going to be without Torrey Krug this season as he had surgery, and he'll be out for the season. He was one of the top quarterbacks for you guys last year on the power play. Have you guys been thinking of who will be quarterbacking that power play unit, or do you guys just want to see how camp goes and have a competition for that spot?
Yeah, I think the camp's going to, when you look at our roster, especially on our back end, we certainly have guys that have played on the power play there before. I look at a guy like Scotty Perunovich that I've had at the American League level, and quite honestly, it was probably his first year in the American League was probably the most dominant player on the ice for the first 20 or 25 or 30 games that we had him before he came up to St. Louis. And he's a guy that I believe could step into that position, but it'll be up to Scotty and training camp how those fall into place. But certainly, whether it's Falker, we know he can do it. P.O. Joseph is, again, I've coached against P.O. quite a bit in the American League, so I've seen what he can do or what he can bring to the team, and that's another aspect of his game where if he comes in and grabs that spot, he could be somebody that fills that void. I don't think we're not gonna replace Torrey Krug. We're gonna miss Torrey Krug. He's just an outstanding human being. That's a tough one to talk about. It's a sensitive one for not only the player but his teammates, because they think extremely highly of him. He's going to be missed. You know, my message to Torrey was, we just want you around. Like, be around, and don't don't not be around. Like, you know, he's moved his family here. He will be having his surgery, and after he feels that he's good to go, whether it's, you know, being around the players or even integrating himself in with the coaching staff and seeing how we do things day to day, like giving him that opportunity and still being part of the team.
Well, Drew, this is always a pleasure to get to talk with you. We're just as excited as you are for this season to get going. We'll be out there for training camp all of next week. Good luck with the rest of the carpentry for the rest of the offseason. I will be sending you pictures to get advice.
That's on my brother-in-law for the time being.
He's taking it over the next 6 months.
Hopefully he finishes it so I can enjoy my summer, because I spent 4 weeks of my time at cottage building a garage.
Well, I'm going to send you pictures from my picnic table and get some carpentry advice. All right, Drew?
Appreciate it.
Drew, thank you so much. We'll see you
guys.
soon, all right?
Appreciate it.
There you go. It's Blues head coach Drew Bannister. We'll take another break. We'll come back after this here on 101. Along with Tanner Hendrickson and Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. We got Drew Yunt here as well, who's helping us get on the air at Enterprise Center. Much appreciate Drew Bannister and Tom Stillman and Chris Kerber swinging by here for the Blues Media Day luncheon. But now let's get into the NFL, because I feel like this is the topic that everybody is talking about after Week 1 officially wrapped up. You'll have the final game of Week 1 tonight, where it's the Jets and 49ers. Rather than do this NFL quick hitter style, T-Bone, I just want to kind of go through some of the storylines and narratives throughout this weekend. And I think the one we start with is the team that underperformed over the weekend that you're most worried about. Because if you look through Week 1, yes, there was some excitement in terms of you saw the Eagles and Packers play one hell of a football game. You saw the Lions go out there and just bully the Rams a little bit, which felt good, T-Bone, sorry to say. The Cowboys go out there and did exactly what everybody expected them to do. But, man, if you go through and look at some of these other teams that had, quote-unquote, high expectations, there's some concern right now. And I'll start at the Bengals, because I know that was Jared Mayo's first NFL start as a head coach, and they got that defense locked in, which I kind of anticipated, the under I was expecting. I was not expecting 10 points in that offense looking miserable from start to finish. I get they had no T. Higgins. Joe Burrow looked uncomfortable from start to finish. They had absolutely zero run game with both Moss and Chase Brown. And I think they had, 2 fumbles in that game offensively? Like, they looked in shambles.
Yeah, they were not impressive. I do play some of that, though, to, like, they've had this weird offseason. I don't want to over-panic on them just yet. Like, I'm going to give them probably 3-4 games. Joe Burrow, historically slow starter. You have Jamar Chase, who, like, first time on the field for the whole offseason is, oh, hey, Week 1, and I'm going to show up and I'm going to play, and he was on a snap count limit. T. Higgins is out because of an injury. I still want to give them a little bit of time, but even so, like, against the Patriots, really, you can't beat them at home, even with your roster not being at 100%.
Right.
I don't know. That was the part that was a little alarming to me. The team for me that was the most concerning, there was 2. One, it just depends on how you view this team, but the Cleveland Browns, holy crap, they've got a quarterback problem.
Yeah.
I know they're going to say, well, he hadn't played football since like week 6 or week 10 of last year. I don't care. Even if he hadn't played football in 2 years, he should have looked better than that.
2 interceptions in that game?
Something like that.
I mean,
Deshaun Watson looked awful in that game for the Cleveland Browns. But the team for me that was most concerning, and maybe some of this is just because the Pittsburgh Steelers have a good defense, so I'm willing to listen to that a little bit. The Atlanta Falcons, only 10 points, did nothing in the second half, didn't score a point in the second half. Kirk Cousins never really looked comfortable. We talk about the weapons that they have. You've got Bijan Robinson, you've got Kyle Pitts, you've got Drake London, and you get Drake London the ball 2 times with 3 targets, and Kirk Cousins is 155 yards, 2 interceptions, only 1 touchdown pass at 16 of 26. I mentioned when we talked about them, it's when I got the FU T-Bone from Stoltz. They're supposed to be a fantasy football kind of dart. They're supposed to thrive in the regular season.
Yeah.
They looked terrible over the weekend at home against the Pittsburgh Steelers. They were the one that I saw that I was like, that's the most alarming to me. I wonder if some of that was the Pittsburgh Steelers defense that they were playing against, but I also have to look at them and say, okay, even if the Steelers defense is good, that offense should have clicked a little bit better than it did, and they're the one that I am super worried about. They should still win the NFC South. That division stinks.
Yeah, it's terrible.
But they really did not look like a team that is a 11-12 win team over the weekend.
They got I thought their offensive line was supposed to be like scary good. Kirk Cousins was under duress that entire game. And again, you're going up against TJ Watt. I get it. Like, that dude has taken over. Aaron Donald leaves. TJ Watt might be the best defensive player in the NFL for watching him.
It's either him or Micah Parsons, one of those 2 guys.
Yeah, but TJ Watt essentially created 2 turnovers on his own. The one got taken away, but 2 of them were just TJ Watt himself. But, like, man, if you can't find a way to keep Kirk Cousins up long enough to be able to find somebody between Drake London and Bijan Robinson and Kyle Pitts, you got an offensive line problem, guys. And their offense too, T-Mum, because that's another really good one. They didn't give me the whole creativity vibes that they were going this whole offseason and be this new team.
Yeah, they looked very kind of old school, stale is what I would call the offense. Like, nothing to get Kirk Cousins out of the pocket. Now, look, he ain't a guy that you probably want running out of the pocket.
Keep him out of the pocket.
But to your point, there was no kind of creativity.
Yeah.
It looked kind of blah, and it looked like it was easy for Mike Tomlin and his staff to kind of prepare for them. That was disappointing. Now, look, I do throw this out as a caveat. You know, I heard, I think it was BK said this morning, and I think it's 100% true. The first 4 weeks are now like the preseason in the regular season for the NFL because a lot of these guys aren't playing. They're going to be very cautious. I do love that I saw some Atlanta fans already calling for Michael Penix, but that is the other thing that kind of throws this into a loop for the Falcons is not only do you underperform in week 1, you drafted a quarterback in the first round that is supposed to be the heir apparent to Kirk Cousins.
Yeah.
So if your offense continues to look this way, you just add extra pressure by having him on this roster.
And you're tied to that money with Kirk Cousins.
Yeah.
For what, 2 more years, 3 more years?
Yeah, 2 or 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Their weird offseason leads to a weird first game. I think they'll be fine, but I don't know. It's one thing if you put up like 20 points and you look somewhat competent on offense, and then we come out of it going, okay, weird game. They lost to the Steelers. Probably should have won that one, but you know what? The offense looked good. I don't know if there's one thing that I can really point to. Like, them holding the Steelers 18 points, that makes sense. Their offense is terrible, and they held them to just 6 field goals. So their defense was fine, but their offense looked atrocious. It was one of the worst outside of what the Cleveland Browns did this weekend. I thought it was the second worst offensive performance I saw.
What about you, Grant?
Well, what's funny going right off of that is the fact that Pittsburgh is the only team from the AFC North that won this week, and they're the only team from the AFC
I forgot.
North.
Grant was the Pittsburgh honk.
They didn't score a touchdown. The only team in the AFC North that didn't score a touchdown was the only one that won.
That's always good.
The other one that I have major concerns about, and I really honestly did before watching the game, but even more so now that the game is over, the Chicago Bears.
Yeah.
Caleb Williams does not look good.
Dude, it's not even Caleb Williams. That NFL draft class, like the rookie quarterbacks, was anybody excited? Like after, and I get it. We're already getting the text. Guys, it's week 1. Calm down. I get it, but welcome to Sports Talk Radio. We like to overreact every once in a while, and sometimes
like me to read you the scores.
Sometimes we're correct when we overreact. But like none of the quarterbacks that we saw that was just drafted got me excited. I mean, the best quarterback was what, Jaden Daniels?
Yeah.
And that wasn't very pretty, but Caleb Williams was awful. 93 yards, and they were celebrating afterwards. Like, look, that was an impressive comeback by Chicago. Also impressive combustion.
It was an impressive comeback by Chicago's defense.
Yeah. Well, and also an impressive just dismay by the Tennessee Titans.
And that's the thing for me. Like, if the Bears were going up against a team that was actually difficult to play against, that'd be one thing. But the fact that they're going up against the Titans, it's like, this is ugly. And
I mean, the Titans got a good defense. They had them under pressure, but like Caleb Williams had no ability to say, like, this isn't working. I need to try something else.
Yeah, I think the thing for me with the Chicago Bears, and I agree with you, it was a pretty disappointing week number 1 for them. But I also kind of expected these kind of weird kind of games for these rookies, and especially Caleb Williams. I mean, you saw what he tried to do yesterday, kind of what he did in college.
Yeah, I was about to say, it looked like he was trying to play college football in the NFL.
The pocket breaks down, so what happens? I'm going to extend the play. I'm going to backpedal. I'm going to try and make a defensive end miss. You're not doing that at the NFL. You're not going to be able to extend plays like that like you can in college. These are the best of the best. And I think that's the number one thing we're going to have to see Caleb Williams really clean up is if you're going to get sacked, you need to just take those yards that you're losing and not back up another 10 yards and make this instead of a 5-6 yard loss, make it a 16-yard loss. And I think that's the number one thing for him. I think when you look at the rest of those rookie quarterbacks, I thought Bo Nix looked overmatched a little bit. We'll see how he develops, but I wasn't that high on him coming into this season. I thought Jaden Daniels was one that was the most impressive, and he's the one that I'm probably the highest coming out of week 1
and you feel bad for Daniels because I think he probably could have been a little bit more successful with better weapons around him.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you look at it, 184 yards passing. It wasn't anything to write home about, but I kind of expected he was going to do more of what he did, which was 16 carries, 88 yards, and 2 touchdowns on the ground.
Yeah. And
if they start to utilize his legs, he's not as big as Cam Newton was. That's kind of the comp for him, though, I think, is that style of play. He should be able to beat you with his arm, and as he starts to mature and starts to get more into this league, we'll start to learn how to read defenses and can beat teams maybe with the deep ball. I think where the Commanders are going to have to really utilize him is with his legs, and I thought they did a pretty good job of that yesterday. Now he's going to have to learn to avoid leaving week 1. Told me of the 3 rookies that played the best, which one do you think will end up putting up the better numbers throughout the season? My first response would be Jaden Daniels because he looked the most comfortable. I do think Caleb Williams will get up there. I think that was the first week he'll start to adjust, especially to the NFL level.
Well, and some of Caleb Williams, too. I mean, there were a couple of drop balls from Keenan Allen. There were a couple of drop balls by Roma Dunze. Like, that is going to take place as well. But, man, every time pressure happened to Caleb Williams, it felt like, uh-oh, what do I do? And it felt like it was back in the college mindset where I can sidestep some of this pocket collapsing on me and get through it.
Yeah.
And I forgot who the broadcaster was on that game, but he said, there's no more college play in the NFL. If you get caught, you're going down.
Yeah, and that's where I am with him. That's his biggest adjustment is if you do get sacked, it can't be a major loss. But I think he's going to ultimately end up being fine. I do think it is a really good thing that they won that football game, by the way, because in that market in Chicago, hey, I've seen some of the stuff our buddy Cap post up in Chicago ripping on those guys. But they lose that football game, there's going to be serious questions about Caleb Williams, especially because Bill Belichick was one that was pretty negative on him through the preseason, saying, hey, he wasn't very accurate in the preseason. I don't think he's going to be putting up significant numbers in the early portion of the year. And Bill Belichick was right. So it's probably a good thing, a blessing in disguise that the Bears were able to win that game. So it does alleviate some of that pressure that would be on him if they lost.
It's going to be really awkward for Bill Belichick when the only job opening available to him for next year is the Chicago Bears. And it's like, oh, well, Caleb Williams might be better than this.
It's funny you mention that because I was thinking of this I think it was while I was watching Jaden Daniels play. And it's not like the Commanders
watching a whole lot of Washington Commanders games.
Yeah, well. There's only 4 games on in the late window. But you say that, and they were, I remember seeing the report of Belichick wanting a new job, and my first thought was, the Bears could be a potential opening. I wonder if a team that has a young quarterback will look at Bill Belichick, or if they have a potential to draft a young quarterback because of the way that the Mac Jones situation played out. Now, I think that was, Mac Jones is just not a starting caliber quarterback, but you saw that yo-yo effect that happened with Mac Jones. It was almost like how the Cardinals handled Jordan Walker this year. It was, okay, he's here. Oh, okay, he's not ready, so he's going to be on the bench. Right. Okay, well, now we need him again. Let's start him. Oh, no, still not ready. Let's put him back on the bench. I wonder if teams will look at that as a negative against Bill Belichick, along with kind of that old-school mindset of I'm the coach, you're the player. I'll be curious to see who will take that give that opportunity to Bill Belichick potentially next season.
That'd be a bold step to hire a very old coach for a young quarterback. But if you get 2 or 3 great years out of it, then it's successful in a lot of people's eyes. Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. We'll get more into football a little bit later on in the 1 o'clock hour. But coming up next, we'll dive into the junk drawer here on 101 ESPN. With Tanner Hendrickson and Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. I need to learn to unmute my microphone when we come back from a segment here. It is time to dive into the junk drawer, and guys, I think you're going to get a kick out of today's junk drawer story. So for those that also play in fantasy football, you might have had a positive or a negative weekend. For yours truly in the 101 League, I might pull out a victory. But I lost Jordan Love for 3 to 6 weeks. And so what happened was I'm watching football with my daughter on Sunday, my 3-year-old Adelaide. We're sitting in the chair. She's sitting with me, and typically when she gets bored, she'll grab my phone and she'll just fiddle around with it. She typically likes to watch Disney Plus on my phone or look at pictures. That's what she does. And so I'm sitting there, I'm focused, watching, and next thing I know, she's just on my phone pressing buttons. And there's no camera, there's no pictures, there's no Disney Plus. She's got my fantasy football app open. And I don't know if you guys saw the transactions that I made over the weekend.
Oh, no, I didn't see this.
But my daughter, 3 years old, mind you, she found a way to drop my quarterback, my backup quarterback, and also pick up 3 other quarterbacks. She must have just gotten to the cycle of pressing a button, pressing another button, and just doing it repeatedly. So she dropped Will Levis off of my roster and picked up, I don't even remember who she picked up, but she picked up another quarterback and then dropped that quarterback, picked up Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, because I remember
there was one before Watson. She did 3 quarterback moves until I noticed. And then I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So now Deshaun Watson is a part of my football roster on fantasy football, and I can't get my quarterback back because you have to do the waivers wire with it.
Honestly, though, is Deshaun Watson a worse option than Will Levis?
About equal, but there's at least upside for Will Levis.
And I don't honestly care either way. I lose my guy, but what pisses me off is she's just pressing these buttons. I'm lucky she didn't drop anything important, and she just hit the quarterback.
Yeah, I'm shocked. So now that you say that, it kind of makes sense because I remember looking at – I remember when Love got hurt, I immediately looked at our league because I'm like, I got to be a 3-time champion. So I looked, I was like, okay, who's really getting hurt by this? And I saw it was your team. But then I remember looking at your roster later the next day, and I was like, oh, boy, poor Alex has Deshaun Watson. I was like, surely he would never draft Deshaun Watson in the league. I thought you took somebody with some upside, and I am right. You are lucky that she didn't.
There's no coming back from that, too, because, you get it back from her, and she's already pressed the buttons. There's no let me just reverse this like a payment on Amazon. Nope, she just dropped them. But man, if she would have dropped something important, I still had to walk out of the room for a couple of seconds. But then I'm like, oh, who cares? It's a backup quarterback anyway. But don't let your kids have your phone fantasy football season, ladies and gentlemen.
What if Deshaun Watson starts to go off, though, and now she's a mastermind?
Then my daughter is a genius.
In Adelaide, we trust.
In Adelaide, we trust. I will change that team name to Adelaide's team because it will run the table on everybody thanks to Deshaun Watson.
Man, that is awesome. I actually am hoping that happens just because we can change the name. The BKOs are no more.
Yeah, well, it's such a good name that you just can't get rid of them. Somebody said, if that's your excuse, Alex, what's BK's for his fantasy football team? I think he actually did good this week.
I'm pretty sure he won.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what happened in our league. BK probably blames his dog or something.
Someone said, "Don't lie, Alex. You made those moves." Let me tell you something.
Was that you?
I would not have picked up Deshaun Watson. I would have found somebody other than that.
You didn't see that and go, man, I bet he has a bounce back.
No. My daughter. Hopefully, she's smarter than I am when it comes to that.
Your daughter can cause some havoc with your phone. I've gotten some FaceTimes from you before, from clearly not you. Where it's from Adelaide. I got a FaceTime from you 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
It came on, my phone pops up and it is FaceTime from Alex Ferrario or phone call from Alex Ferrario. Mm-hmm. And then it disappears and I just go, all right, unless he texts me, I'm just going to assume that was a child.
Yeah, she butt dials a lot of people. She does a lot of fantasy football damage. So watch out because I will teach her how to get somebody else's phone, get into their fantasy football, and delete all of their players off of the roster. You're coming first, T-Bone.
She's going to be a hacker someday.
Oh, so much so.
Password.
Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. Coming up next, the Cardinals, even though they lost 2 of 3 to the Mariners over the weekend, there was one significant front office move that happened, and that might be a preview of what the rest of this offseason looks like. We'll get into that and Miles Michaelis' rough day all coming up next here on 101 ESPN. Along with Tanner Hendrickson and Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario here at Enterprise Center for the Blues Media Day Luncheon, and we will have in or out coming up in our next segment. You send us a scenario, 314-399-9646. We will tell you if we are in or out. You can also send it over on our YouTube channel at 101 ESPN STL. It's presented by the Air Alliance team. Our camera is up on YouTube. But let's go over to the Cardinals side, because the Cardinals lose 2 of 3 to the Seattle Mariners over the weekend. Doesn't really do much in terms of the playoff hopes. Other teams around you continue to win. It kind of feels like the Cardinals are dead in the water. We don't really need to talk about that because I think everybody's on the same page with it.
I believe.
Yeah, I know you do, buddy. It's just like, 3 years ago when they made that historic run?
Look, man, I mentioned how the standings were in their favor. They're no longer. They've actually lost ground, and they played well in the 22-game
Of course they did. Of course they did. But there was one other move over the weekend, front office-wise, that kind of put my alarm bells up. It was Gary LaRocque announcing his retirement. And for those that don't know, he's the director of player development. In conversations that I've had with members of the Cardinals staff and being around the Cardinals, this dude oversaw everything in the minor leagues. From the moment that player is drafted to the moment he gets to the major leagues, Gary LaRocque is in charge. And he's one of the best at what he does for the Cardinals. And I've had multiple conversations with people talking about his role with the team. He's been with them since 2008, I believe. And he went from being an assistant for general manager all the way up to being the director of player development. The one thing that I thought of when I saw that, T-Bone, was, is this a preview of what else is to come? Because maybe it just was time for him to retire. Maybe he just said, you know what, it's that time for me. It's been a good run. It's time for me to step away from the game. But it just feels like an odd thing to happen in the middle of the season when things just have not gone well for the Cardinals, when we've heard scuttlebutt of potential other moves that can take place in terms of the front office and what could happen. This kind of felt like me. I wonder if this is the start of a new regime for the Cardinals front office, to where they say, you know what, it's retirement, but we needed somebody else in that role. Maybe it does become retirement for John Mozeliak, and he'll still be with the organization because Gary LaRocque is still going to have a role with the Cardinals moving forward. But it just felt like the precursor to, boy, I wonder if a lot of other people are going to say, hey, it's been enough for me. It's time to let somebody else take over.
Yeah, this is the first major change to the front office in years, and a very significant one at that. I think when you see what happened, my hope is that it's the first of what is potentially multiple significant changes to that front office. That doesn't necessarily mean, John Mozeliak is fired or John Mozeliak retires, but that they continue to look at the player development side and say, okay, what do we need to do to fix what's gone wrong here? A new voice for director of player development, maybe adding coaches, maybe adding more advisors to that role, which is something that they really cut back on after the pandemic. While the pandemic was going on, they never really refilled those positions. I think when you see what happened with the St. Louis Cardinals in this move, the hope is you get to see multiple more of these moves, just because they need to take a significant is going to be stepping aside in a year.
And that's what I thought too.
I wonder, just kind of tinfoil here, I wonder if they will have Chaim Bloom run it for a year, and then they'll go from there.
That would make sense.
Chaim Bloom is a guy that's had experience doing this. He wasn't director of player development when he was with Tampa Bay, but he was an assistant that kind of oversaw some of their minor league stuff. We know he's been looking into some of their stuff in the minor league level since he's been here as an advisor. I don't know, just a tinfoil theory of mine, but whatever the move is for whoever takes on this next role, one, I don't think they can get away with just saying, okay, let's have a one-year stopgap for this role. But two, they can't just say, hey, Mo, go hire this guy and have that guy in place for whoever the next Pobo is. No, whoever the next Pobo is needs to be named this offseason and needs to make this hire for the player development side and whatever else moves that may need to occur.
That was the first thing I thought of, too, was if there's going to be more changes, it would make sense that this is the start, because you don't hire somebody for that role, that impactful of a role. Because believe it or not, I believe being in charge of player development is so crucial for a team like this right now that is stuck in this middle that we've talked so much about the Blues. And if you're passing over regimes in a year and your team is going to take a step back next season and not be, quote-unquote, competing, man, you got to make sure you hire the right guy for this position. And you can't hire the right guy for this position if the guy hiring is not in that position. So it immediately I looked at it and I said, okay, well, this could be nothing. This could just be Gary LaRocque getting a different role and being done with player development. But this also could be something for this Cardinals team in terms of the significant changes that might take place by the end of this offseason.
Yeah, we'll see what ends up happening. I'm still skeptical of what will happen with this kind of position and those multiple moves that we're talking about. But it does feel like you know what, we need to kind of go separate ways. He's announcing his retirement. Maybe that is the perfect jumping off point for a significant overhaul with their player development, because you're right, they're a team that's going to need that. You know, not just to get out of the middle that they are in, kind of stuck in between. Mm-hmm. They're an organization that relies on that. They're an organization that relies upon, hey, we've got to have pitching development, or we've got to develop position players, then go out and get those guys, because unlike the Dodgers, who can mask their deficiencies, or the Philadelphia Phillies, who can mask their deficiencies by spending a ton of money on their roster, don't get me wrong, Cardinals are in a good position in terms of what they spend, being around top 10 in payroll, but that's not going to cover up all the holes that we've seen from this team. I mean, look at their roster now. Look at what they had to go do in the offseason to go sign 3 free agent starting pitchers to just fill some voids. You can't sustain that model if you're the St. Louis Cardinals. You've got to get back to developing and having a pipeline, and this is hopefully the first of many moves to come for the St. Louis Cardinals in that front office this offseason.
Well, the developing and the pipeline is going to be heavily focused on the pitching side of things. And I think after we saw another start from Miles Mikolas over the weekend, the Cardinals are going to have one of their bigger decisions they're going to have to make if they are taking a step back is, what do we do with Miles Mikolas? He went 2 innings, 9 hits, 6 earned runs, 3 strikeouts. The start prior, he gave them 4 innings with 3 earned runs. The start prior to that was 5 2/3 with 4 earned runs.
All right.
They've got a starter who is supposed to be eating innings and keeping you competitive games that is not eating innings or keeping you competitive in games. And this is a guy that's going to be making $18 million next year, if I'm not mistaken, 17. If a guy like Miles Mikolas, I think it might be to the point now where the Cardinals might have to start looking at Miles Mikolas as, hey, is it time to move on and move into the next wave of pitchers? Because I don't know if you're running it back with a rotation next season, you're going to have, I mean, unless you trade Gray, which you have the ability to do, or Fetty, Gibson, you want to pick up that option, I think. I think guys already fill the void of fill the role of what Miles Mikolas is supposed to be in terms of an innings eater that at least keeps you somewhat competitive, and you're not paying him $18 million.
Yeah, with him making $18 million, and it just depends on what you want to do, right? You know, if they want to go through a bit of a retool, a youth movement, if you're the St. Louis Cardinals, then maybe you need his contract, or you need him on this roster, because when you look at Miles Mikolas, his role is to eat innings. The problem is when, like you said, he's not doing it. So if I'm the Cardinals, my number one goal this offseason would be, okay, let's eat some of that salary. Let's move on from it. It's only 1 year at $17.6 million. Hell, maybe they even consider the possibility of just DFAing him. I don't think you want to eat all of that money. Try and move it if you can. I think if you're the Cardinals, you pick up the Gibson option, to your point, have him take on the role of the innings eater. And he's been not only an innings eater, but an effective innings eater, unlike Miles Mikolas so far this season. And you hope that you eat like $10 million of the Mikolas deal. You pay it like $10, $11 million for Kyle Gibson, and you're at plus basically $20 million, but for one of those guys not to be here. Look, it's not a great spot to be in.
Right.
It's not what any organization wants to be in, but it's a spot that they're going to have to look at, because Miles Mikolas isn't worth $17 million that he's playing at right now, and he's not even an innings eater for him, so he's not helping them. And right now he's the second worst pitcher in baseball. You know, he's right there with Patrick Corbin, and we talked about how bad of a contract Patrick Corbin is. So it'll be interesting to see how they explore that, because if he's eating innings and you're a retooling team, I could see how you get to that spot where you just say, you know what, it's 1 more year, we'll eat the salary. Somebody's got to throw those innings to alleviate some of that pressure on the young guys. I think if you're the Cardinals right now, I would just pick up Gibson's option and move on from the Miles Mikolas experience.
Kyle Gibson is that guy, and then you keep Eric Fetty and hope Fetty is that number 2, even though it didn't seem like he could be. You just hope he and Gray can be a better 1-2 punch than what Gray and Mikolas were through the start of the season. He's Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis. I'm Alex Ferrario. Coming up next, Chris Zimmerman, Blues president and CEO of business operations, is going to swing by here at the Blues Media Day Luncheon. We'll also get to In or Out, all coming your way in just a bit here on BK and Ferrario on 101 ESPN. Welcome back into BK and Ferrario. We are here at Enterprise Center for the Blues Media Day Luncheon, and just wrapped up the presentation on the stage for a lot of the media members. I know Drew Bannister was speaking, Bernie Federko, John Kelly, Chris Kerber, and just momentarily ago, Chris Zimmerman, Blues president and business CEO of Business Operations, was speaking with the media here at Enterprise Center. And Chris, it's always great to see you. How are you?
Well, I'm doing good. This is a nice setup. Did they get you any food back here?
No, not yet. I keep seeing pictures posted, but I think
one of you guys, I don't know how
is it all gone now?
Staying, but you might want to go grab some.
Well, that's always good to know. Hey, I've seen the pictures though, and it looks like the food. I know they were putting a lot of samples out there for the food upcoming for the season, so I'll just have to buy it once the season gets underway.
Okay.
Get out there for it. But Chris, I know when you were up on stage, you guys were just talking about a pretty significant news from the Blues ownership group about the Stiefel Theater.
Yeah. So, what year was it? It reopened in
2011, I think, right?
2011, I believe. So it was a few years before I got here. I wasn't involved in that renovation, but as you may know, it had been shuttered for 2 decades, and it's a wonderful. It's just an amazing building. Theater that was built in the 1930s, and unfortunately, there are lots of people who have very fond memories of it before it shut down. And so, yeah, when it was a couple of local businessmen, it's almost the same story as Tom Stillman and the hockey team,
right?
Who Joe and Chris McKee, who were in the construction business, they teamed up with some of the Tower Brook team, which was the prior owners to Tom Stillman and his group. Tom was actually a minority owner at the time. But they teamed up to bring the building back and to restore it and to, I'll use the word, bring its grandeur back. And they did that really beautifully. I got here in 2014, and I will tell you, similar to the hockey business, running a theater it's not the easiest, most profitable part of the entertainment industry, but importantly, it's a really valuable civic asset, as much as anything else. But quite honestly, when I took the job, I hadn't even been in that theater.
Really?
And I walked across, and I kind of marveled at the beauty of how it had been restored and just the structure. And over time, over the first few years, we learned a little bit more about that business. And Joe and Chris McKee have been just amazing stand-up partners. And as Tom Stillman mentioned on stage as he made the announcement that the Blues were, if you will, buying out the McKee's interest. And it was really just a matter of we've been the primary operating partner with them, but they've been there side by side with us, incredibly supportive. I think it's fair to say without their involvement, that building, may not be standing today or would still be shuttered.
Yeah.
And so massive respect and gratitude from our organization to Joe and Chris and the role they played. And I know they have many fond memories, and there were certainly bumps along the road in getting that done, and it's always complex. There are many other entities. The theater, like the arena, is actually owned by the city, and the Blues have a long-term operating lease agreement, and now gives us the full, if you will, management of both facilities.
So, Chris, if I'm not mistaken, I believe back in June was the 10-year anniversary for you being hired by the St. Louis Blues. And just big picture for you, what have you taken away from the growth of just the Blues with this local ownership group, you being a part of it since then?
Yeah, well, I think, as Tom said it the first day he took over, that he and his group were about being stewards of, a great city asset. And I mean, obviously, the great thing about Tom is he comes to if you will, the role and his position of ownership. He comes at it through the lens of his own personal passion for the game. I mean, as some of your listeners and many know, I met Tom in New York City 30 plus years ago, and we both played against each other in men's hockey and a little bit on the same team. And I can tell you, 30 years ago, it was a lot better being on Tom's team than playing against him. And but I think the approach that he's brought to, really respecting the brand, respecting our fan base, and wanting to deliver a championship team. I mean, I like to say we come into work every day knowing that the ultimate goal is getting back to, the 2019 result and bringing a cup back. And everybody in the organization recognizes there's that goal. And then the other thing that we try to do is make a difference in people's lives in St. Louis. If we do that really well, we're probably going to be successful. Obviously, when you're in the sports and entertainment business, there's the experience of coming to a game. And what does that feel like? And we survey our single game ticket holders all the time. We do season ticket holder surveys all the time. So we're getting feedback, and we know, like everything, just like there is for the team, there's always upside. And I got asked how my summer was, or how the off season was, which is one of my favorite questions, because you really have no off season.
Right.
You may get some time off. You may do your work, some of your work from other places, but it's always going. And because a little bit of there are ways that we can keep getting better. And it's the same thing for Doug and his team. It's the same thing for Drew Bannister and his coaching staff. We're looking to get better. But, back to the question about hockey and St. Louis, it's this has been a great hockey market for a long time. We've needed to make it a better business proposition. And we've been fortunate, to make significant progress on that front. We sold out, 40 of 41 games. We've got a great television audience. We tend to be, one of the top 5 teams in terms of our U.S. television ratings. And so for us, a lot of what we're doing is, how do we bring new people to the game? How do we find new ways to communicate in a changing communications world? All of those things are sort of where we are in, okay, how do you keep expanding hockey in St. Louis?
Well, and you've seen that over the years, Chris, going back to 2019 when the Stanley Cup was won, a couple of years prior to that, the Winter Classic. And then now you get to this point where we've talked in the past of trying to bring hockey tournaments out to St. Louis at Centene, but you are bringing the Prospect Tournament this upcoming weekend, which brings in Chicago and Minnesota fans. And then we've got another Winter Classic this upcoming season. That's that expansion that you're speaking of.
Well, yeah, and a lot of it is, so there's the, I call it, there's the non-hockey playing fan base. We love, by the way, we love all fans.
Of course.
We accept them anyway that they
non-hockey
want
is
to
welcome.
come to the game. And I like to say that if you haven't been and seen a hockey game live, the experience is fantastic. And we believe once we typically get people into the building, they usually become hockey fans. And then the other side of it is just youth hockey and participation. It's not surprising that you grow your participation numbers. Often that's going to, you get one kid in the game, the family becomes part of the game, and there's a multiplier effect. Well, since 2019, we've grown player participation in the St. Louis region by almost 30%. It's one of the fastest growth rates in the country. And that's part of the ongoing process. And that we've done that through our Little Blues programs, by getting into schools with ball hockey, sometimes for kids who are never going to put on skates, but we're finding ways to expose them to the game. For our sport, you need the facilities. So getting Centene Community Ice Center built, it's one of the finest facilities in the country. The Maryville facility, new rinks going up in Illinois and Edwardsville. All of that is part of how you grow the game. And, I'm happy to say that that's happening. We're obviously taking an active role in all of that.
Chris Zimmerman is with us. Final question for you, Chris, and I know you've probably been asked it a ton. You mentioned the TV deal and kind of where things are at. For somebody who's been in this business so long, and I mean, you were at Nike for a long time before you got with the St. Louis Blues. What do you feel like from a business side of view are the immediate challenges that you feel like with this uncertainty of the TV deal right now for the team?
Well, I'd like to go to what are the opportunities, because it's really about, hey, there is, and maybe it's an overstatement, but let's go back to the pandemic, and people became more and more comfortable with getting various television products through various streaming services. Right. That trend's going to keep going, and so there are fewer traditional cable homes. We need to find a way to meet those people, to bring them to our games, and so there's a bit of a revolution going on in local sports television, and I'd say we don't all know exactly how that ends. I mean, this year we will be on Bally's again. People will find their games either through the Bally's Plus product or their local cable provider. Those things will continue. But at the same time, I can assure you we are spending a lot of time understanding not just game product, but how we continue to get all of our communication and content in the best ways to our fan base, because people want to consume our sport in different ways, and we have to go meet them there.
Well, and it's exciting times right now. I know you've probably gotten asked a question a lot by fans, how excited you are for this upcoming season, and I know us as fans and us at 101 ESPN are just as excited. So, Chris, it's always great to talk with you, sir. It's great to see him. Happy hockey is back, and I know we'll be seeing you around the rink a lot.
Absolutely.
There you
Thanks
go.
so much.
Chris Zimmerman, appreciate him stopping by. We'll take another break. We'll come back and hit In or Out next on 101 ESPN. 314-399-9646. That is our Air Comfort Service text line. You can also get in the conversation over on our YouTube channel at 101 ESPN STL. Drew Yunt's taking care of us on that side today here out at Enterprise Center for the Media Day luncheon that's just about wrapped up. So fun time today talking with Chris Zimmerman, Tom Stillman, Chris Kerber, and Drew Bannister, which, by the way, if you miss any of it, you could check it all out up on our podcast page, 101ESPN.com, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Always appreciate Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers being a part of that. Let's start with this one, guys. In or out? By the end of the season, we're talking about Illinois as a different team under Brett Bielema.
I will say, I know. I'm going to say out. I think you're always going to view Brett Bielema as a great program builder. What I don't know if he'll ever be able to get them over the hump or over the top. And maybe that's not possible at Illinois. You know, I think some programs it is just really hard to do that. And Illinois is probably one of the toughest jobs in the Big Ten. But even after I've brought this up, it was one of my criticisms of him last year. And I think he's done a better job of winning in the portal than winning in recruiting.
Absolutely.
They've got some great guys they got in the portal for the current team. But I don't know if he's ever going to be able to build off of really big wins like this and recruit at the level that you need to be able to get into the college football playoff and get over the top. So I think the Brett Bielema era is always going to be about an 8-9 win team. I don't know if he'll ever be able to build a playoff team, but you know what? At least he's got me excited about Illinois football, and for like 3 years I'll be happy with that, and then I'll be calling for his job.
Well, and I was going to say, I mean, at least you got 2 of the last 3 years where you were excited about Illinois football, and then the one you just hated everything about that team.
Yeah, last year's team was rough.
Last year's team was a rough go, but, I mean, you just look at the Big Ten, like, it just feels like it can at least stay competitive this season, which is somewhat exciting. I mean, obviously you've got the top dog in Ohio State, but, like, watching Illinois –
and they don't have them on the schedule. Like,
yeah. You got Michigan, you got Nebraska, and if you get through Nebraska, which I think is doable for Illinois, it's going to be tough, but it's doable. I mean, at least this season can get you a little bit more excited than years past.
Yeah.
Well, and the thing, too, is, and I'll say what I said earlier, like, Penn State looks not that great. Like, Penn State just struggled against Bowling Green. Oregon doesn't look that great.
Yeah.
Like, you have opportunities to win some big games here. So, if they do that, that's the key for Illinois.
All right, T-Bone, what do you got?
Guys, in or out? There was not a team that you saw on Sunday in the AFC that made you think they can beat the Chiefs in the playoffs.
Oh, that's a – man.
Now, reminder, Jets play tonight, so it's
Yeah.
possible they change our tune on this one. But
I'm
from
not
what
buying
we saw on
into that.
Sunday.
I do not buy into the Dolphins. I think I said that on Friday. Josh Allen going beast mode there at the end of the game was fun, but you ain't doing that for 17 games and then through the playoffs. I'll say I'm in. I think their best chance of a team taking them down is Houston, and Houston's defense did not improve to the level that I thought they would. Now, the Jets maybe changed my mind. I'm not as sold on the Jets, just like I'm not as sold on a couple of other teams in the AFC, so I'll say I'm in on this. I don't think anybody's going to be able to stop them.
I mean, I'll say in on this, but at the same time, like, we're talking about if Isaiah Likely gets his toe tap in, we're going to overtime in that game. Like, the Ravens are still right there, and I think the Ravens
But do you believe the
could.
Ravens win that in overtime?
No. But my point is that, like, they're right there.
Yeah.
Like, can they go into a playoff game, weird things happen in the playoffs, and end up coming out on top? It could happen. I could see it.
I just don't trust that offensive line. We talked about it with the Ravens, and their offense just does not scream to me as dynamic as the ability to take down the Chiefs.
Yeah, I'm in on this, and I know people don't like when we overreact to week one, but I mean, looking at the Chiefs, man, it looked like they were playing with their food on Thursday Night Football.
Yeah.
And I said that at the time, their offense should be better than what it was a year ago. And I thought a year ago they couldn't win a Super Bowl. Mahomes still carried them to a Super Bowl championship. So I don't think I saw anybody over the weekend that made me say, okay, I think they can beat them in the playoffs. You're right, Josh Allen was impressive, but it would take that kind of game to beat the Chiefs. Yeah. And if you need that kind of game from your quarterback, I don't know. It's a tough ask for any quarterback in the NFL to do that. Houston, I thought they played well against the Indianapolis Colts. I just don't know about their defense. You know, offensively they might be able to put up points, but to your point, I wasn't that impressed with their defense. So I'm in on this. I don't know if anybody really impressed me enough to think that they could top the Kansas City Chiefs in the playoffs.
Grant, what do you got?
So there always seems to be a team that's not expected to make the playoffs in the NHL that ends up making it. A couple of years ago it was Seattle and New Jersey. Last year, probably Washington is that team you can name.
And it'll be the Blues.
Oh,
is that what you're going with?
I like where your head's at.
Easy.
In or out, Utah is that team this year.
Ooh, yeah.
Because here's my thing. Last year, Arizona, early on, looked like they could be a playoff team. They played really well to start the season, and then it all fell apart, but they've improved.
And I can see the Utah Hockey Club getting to the playoffs. That I can totally see that one. I think when you look at them, they added significant pieces to make them better. So I would say in.
I'm going to say out. I still don't think Utah's a playoff team because of their goaltending. Like, I just go through teams that have the proper goaltending, and I don't put Utah in that conversation. I think just roughly going through the 8 teams, like I think Dallas, Winnipeg, Colorado, Nashville are going to be there. That's 4 teams in the Central. I think you got Vancouver, Edmonton. I'll still give LA the credit because they've got the players. I would put Vegas there because who knows what they're going to do. Those are 8 teams. And then the fringe teams, I think Utah's a part of those fringe teams, but I would put them below St. Louis and Minnesota. I think the tiers would be St. Louis, Minnesota, then Utah.
Oh, really?
Like, I think Utah is in the same conversation as the Seattle Kraken.
I don't. I think they're a level up compared to the Kraken.
I don't think Sergachev changes them that much.
I think he does.
He missed all of last season, and it was a knee injury, and their goaltender is still Vejmelka and Connor Ingram.
But Vejmelka had a little bit of a down year last year. He was really good.
Yeah, people were saying Ingram was better than Jordan Binnington.
Yeah, that was dumb. But I do think if Utah was an Eastern Conference team, they'd be in the playoffs. I think the West is going to be so tough this year, they're not going to be able to do it. I think Vegas is better than LA. I think the Kings are going to be the team that's like at risk of falling out of that 8th spot, the second wild card spot. And I think it's going to be the Blues, Utah, and maybe Minnesota, Calgary in the mix.
I'll tell you the team that I would sell all of your stock in right now, the Winnipeg Jets.
See, but we all said that last year.
Yeah, but when you lose Rick Bowness, that's a massive loss. Like, that's a guy that I think changes a team. I could be wrong on it, but I don't think they're a 110-point team like they were last year. All right, let's get to a couple of these. In or out, the NFL's new formation penalties need to go away. Did you see a lot of those over the weekend? I feel like it was just the Ravens game, and then I didn't see it. Now, I was watching Red Zone, so I could have missed a ton of them.
That's what I was wondering. I was like, I watched Red Zone, so maybe I missed them. I understand. Don't get me wrong. They are annoying, especially when you see a bunch of them thrown against the Ravens. I mean, the Ravens should just kind of play to the rules, like make sure you're lined up properly. It's not that hard.
Oh, tell that to Kadarius Toney.
I know, and there's a reason he's not in the league right now. I'll say I'm out on this. I don't have an issue with it if it's being called properly, and I don't think they got any of them wrong against Baltimore the other day.
Yeah.
I'm going to go in on this. I can't stand the amount of penalties that are called sometimes in games. Like, that Thursday Night Football game was frustrating, and I agree with you guys. Like, I didn't notice it that much outside of that game. But, like, in my opinion, the more rules you put in place to create penalties, it gets more and more annoying.
Yeah, I'll tell you what I did like, the kickoff rule. I didn't think I liked it after the first game, Baltimore and Kansas City, because
it was weird to me.
It is, but boy, I love it when teams take advantage of it, because when they take it, they're going to like the 40-yard line.
I don't know if we're going to see enough teams, at least this year, we'll see because of the numbers and what it plays out to be. But like for the Rams, for example, basically Sean McVay's just said, we're kicking the ball out of the end zone. We don't want to risk it because the way that the idea is that you make it more returnable so you can kind of create more offense, bring back that excitement for the return.
That should be
Sean McVay's basically just like, no fun, 30-yard line. That's where everybody starts their drive.
Sean McVay is like Ted Lasso. Instead of believe, it says don't risk it.
Yeah. I think you're going to see a lot of teams ultimately get to that point, but we'll see. Maybe it ends up where teams say, hey, we actually are able to cover this a little bit better. I worry, though, you're going to get a lot of teams that are going to take the Sean McVay approach and say it's not worth the risk. We're just starting everybody at the 30.
Let's start this. We'll do this last one, and then we'll hit the rewind on the other side. In or out, the Missouri Tigers will not cover the spread against Boston College.
See, I'm actually out on, or will not cover it. I will say,
cover
I'll say out on this. I think they will cover. I think Boston College is getting all this hype for their win over Florida State. The only reason they're in the top 25, I actually think it's a joke that they're in over Illinois.
Yeah.
Maybe biased, but they beat Florida State, and then I'm looking to see who they played last week. It was their home opener, so don't get me wrong. Florida State at the time felt like a really good win.
Yeah, but we all know Florida State is a fraud right now.
But we saw Florida State lose to Georgia Tech. Florida State's not ranked anymore. They weren't number 10 like they were when they beat them on the road, and they just beat Duquesne 56-0, who's a FCS school. So I'm supposed to believe that they're going to keep this within 16 points going against a legitimate top 10 opponent at Mizzou? I'm out. I'm taking Mizzou. I can give you a little teaser now. That's probably going to be in my top 3 for the pick'em this week.
Thinking the same thing. I mean, minus 16.5. That's delicious to me right now. I think that's going to be an easy cover against Boston College.
Yeah, and I agree too. Like, even though Boston College had that game against Florida State's a nobody to me. I don't care who beats Florida State. That means nothing.
Just like Duquesne, huh? I don't even know if I'm saying that right.
I think you are.
Okay.
Now, where is Duquesne?
No clue.
Ain't it out east?
Ain't it out east?
Aren't they in the A10?
Hold on.
Or they were in the A10? I think they're in the A10 for basketball.
Well, they are out in the east, T-Bone.
I
had to Google it because I don't know where Duquesne is.
But, like, it's the same thing with Georgia Tech. Like, yeah, they beat Florida State. What does that mean?
Yeah.
They were ranked for 1 week, and
as we saw, they didn't belong in the top 25. They lost to Syracuse.
So, yeah, I'm out. They cover this week, in my opinion.
With Tanner Hendrickson and Grant Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. We will hit the rewind and wrap it up next here on 101 ESPN. At 101 ESPN salutes our nation's military for service members, their families, and anyone currently on base at Scott Air Force Base. You can join the Fast Lane for their annual Military Appreciation live broadcast next Wednesday, September 18th from 2 to 6 o'clock. If you're on base, we hope you stop by the Fast Lane live broadcast from 2 to 6 live from Scott Air Force Base. It's brought to you by Air Comfort Service Heating, Cooling, and Insulation, CarStar, and Budweiser. As we wrap it up with the rewind, we'll wrap things up with the Illinois victory over Kansas, and once again a Mizzou victory. Big wins for both sides. Mizzou maybe doesn't feel as big because it was against Buffalo. It's big in my eyes because your defense just kind of proved that they are really, really good this season, and the offense will figure itself out. But the most important one, T-Bone, was Illinois finding ways to take down 19th-ranked Kansas and put themselves not in the top 25, but at least in the conversation.
Yeah, that's the biggest win in the Brett Bielema area. Hopefully they're able to capitalize on that. It helps with recruiting. It helps them kind of feel more confident. They should be an 8-win team, I think, this season. Now that they've got this one under their belt, they're going to have a couple more tough tests. Maybe they can be 9 wins, but as long as they avoid those kind of slip-ups, they should be an 8-win team at minimum. And for me, for the Missouri Tigers, look, offensively, I don't think we're learning much about them. I think Brady Cooks looks a little bit off, but I'm not too worried about it. I think right now he's just kind of working out some of the kinks in his game. I think he's ultimately going to be fine. Their defense, though, I got to see it against a Power 5 team or Power 4 team. We'll see it this weekend against Boston College. But, man, that defense right now is doing what it should do, which is take care of business, 0 points back-to-back games, and they've got, based on all the statistical categories, it looks like one of the best defenses in the country.
Yeah, Eli Drinkwitz found a way to overhaul that defense this offseason, and it looks really good, but you do get that test against a ranked opponent coming up very soon. So, again, if you missed anything from the show today, you can check it all out on our podcast page, 101ESPN.com, presented by Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers. Again, you can hear from Drew Bannister, Tom Stillman, Chris Zimmerman, and Chris Kerber all joined us here on 101 ESPN. And we've got your shot to score a pair of tickets to the Blues and Brews. Make sure you are paying attention to that on the website. September 20th at Anheuser-Busch. You can get fired up for the Blues season at this outdoor street party. It features live music from country music star Matt Stell and St. Louis's own Charles Glenn Group. Appearances by Braden Shen, Jake Neighbors, Dylan Holloway, Philip Broberg, Drew Bannister, and Blues alumni. You can check it all out online to find your chance to win. T-Bone and I will be back tomorrow with BK. Appreciate Drew Yunt and Graham Francis helping us out today. The Fast Lane comes your way next on 101 ESPN.